Welcome back after the break. You're watching Indus News and I am Fiza Jamal with our latest stories in detail. The UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has asked the Queen to suspend Parliament till mid-October. Some MPs have criticised the move as an attempt to block legislation that would bar a no-deal Brexit. But Johnson said he asked the Parliament to be prorogued so the government's plans can be unveiled before Brexit. He said there will be ample time to debate Brexit before and after an EU summit on October the 17th. Johnson said he will schedule a Queen's speech for October the 14th in order to launch new legislation. It comes a day after Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn met with MPs to plan a strategy for stopping a no-deal exit from the EU. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has called the move a dark day in Britain's political history. For more on this, we have with us Holly Hudson from London. Thank you for your time, Holly. So Prime Minister Boris Johnson just confirmed a BBC report that the government plans to suspend the UK Parliament to maybe block opposition legislation to stop a no-deal Brexit. What more can you tell us about this?
Well, this is Boris Johnson sidestepping Parliament. There's been rumours circulating for some time now that this was the government's plan, that they were intending to prorogue or shut down Parliament. And we now know why Boris Johnson wouldn't rule it out even this weekend at the G7 summit. Essentially, what it means is that it's an extension of the parliamentary recess, which already happens. They go on conference, what's called conference recess, until the beginning of October. Boris Johnson now wants to ask the Queen for an extension of that suspension. But the reason this is so controversial is that this isn't the normal process. These aren't normal times. In the Brexit context here in Britain, nothing is. And particularly the issue that is so contentious with regards to the request for this suspension of Parliament means that MPs will have their time curtailed to block a no-deal Brexit. Now, Boris Johnson, we heard him earlier say that that's not the case at all. This is not an anti-democratic move, as opposition MPs would have you believe. This is just the typical process when a new government, a new administration begins. The state opening of Parliament has just been pushed back slightly, but this isn't a normal situation, and it certainly curtails the time that MPs have to push through any legislation to try and stop no-deal Brexit. So a very fierce reaction from opposition MPs who only yesterday decided to focus on legislative ways to try and block a no-deal Brexit. So that option seemingly potentially off the table, or at least definitely the pressure is on for them to act in the next coming weeks or days.
Right, Holly, and you repeatedly said that this is not a normal situation. So do you get the sense that Johnson may have to sidestep Parliament eventually?
Yes, this is a clear message from Boris Johnson that he's pushing ahead with his deal or no deal. We will leave the EU by the 31st of October, sidestepping Parliament, or at least trying to stop them from stopping him getting through no deal. Because what, even in this context of Brexit here in Britain at the moment, there was talk of Parliament not going on conference recess and actually sticking around in order to try and debate and figure out ways of blocking Boris Johnson from pushing through no deal. Others argue that this is a clever attacking move from Boris Johnson because it actually could bring back the vote of no confidence in his government. It is a risk because it could do that. However, that means that if it's a yes, then obviously no deal, he would be able to force through no deal. If it's a no, then he would actually potentially face a general election, which may not seem on first glance what you'd expect Boris Johnson to want in the first few months of his premiership. But actually, he has a very slim majority in Parliament, so it's going to be very difficult for him to win any votes, win any sort of amendments to a motion. So what he would want to do is actually get a majority in order to either push through no-deal Brexit, but definitely push through his domestic agenda, give him that legitimacy, give him that mandate, which the opposition MPs say he just doesn't have to take us out of the EU without a deal.
And Holly, considering this huge political pressure, what is the likelihood of the Conservative government surviving the next 2 months?
there is huge political pressure. This is causing, has already caused a huge row. This move, this cunning plan, as many MPs see it, by Boris Johnson to either avert a bloc to a no deal or potentially lead to another general election. Yesterday, a group of opposition MPs led by the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn came to the conclusion that their tactics to stop no deal would be to focus on legislative measures to block no deal, seeking a request to the an extension of the 31st of October deadline that the EU has set. But now that time, the time that they have to do that, is seriously curtailed. They would have to act in the next week, so it's piling the pressure on the opposition MPs. And Boris Johnson, even though that is a risk, he does risk setting MPs against him with such a slim majority, and that could lead to a vote of no confidence coming back, opposition MPs bringing that back and bringing down the Johnson government, which would then install a caretaker government and would then lead to a general election.
Right, and we'll definitely keep up with the developments here at Indus News. Thank you so much, Holly, for your time. That was Holly Hudson joining us live from London. Moving on, India's Supreme Court has issued a notice to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government. The court has taken up petitions against India's revocation of occupied Kashmir special status. Kashmiri activists and politicians have mounted the challenge to India's illegal move. Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi issued the notice despite the opposition of government lawyers. He said the court's order will not be changed. The case has been adjourned till early October. A 5-member constitutional bench of the top court will hear the petition. And now moving on to occupied Kashmir, a government official has said that 500 protests have broken out since India illegally annexed it on August the 5th. The valley has been under a crushing curfew and a communication blackout for 24 days now. The official said that the number of protests would have been much higher if the Indian blockade was not in force. He said Indian efforts to ease conditions in occupation are failing while public anger is rising. Talking about the morale of Indian occupation forces, the official said nervousness is spreading within the security establishment. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says Indian Prime Minister Modi undermined bilateral diplomacy. Talking to the media in Islamabad, Qureshi said Modi should tell the world whether India's revocation of occupied Kashmir was bilateral or unilateral. Qureshi was responding to Modi's assertion that Kashmir is a bilateral issue between Pakistan and India. The foreign minister said India, rather than Pakistan, has internationalized the Kashmir issue. He said petitions against revocation of occupied Kashmir special status is a test for India's Supreme Court. Qureshi said it is up to the top Indian court to give an independent judgment or succumb to Modi's pressure. Moving on, Taliban insurgents have killed 14 soldiers in an attack on a checkpoint in western Afghanistan. Herat police spokesman Abdul Ahid Walizada says seven others were wounded. The Taliban claim that they have killed 42 government soldiers in other attacks since yesterday. Spokesman Zabiullah says that operations were conducted in Faryab, Ghazni and Helmand provinces. The Taliban have again said that they are very close to concluding a peace agreement with the US. In a statement issued in Doha, spokesperson Sohail Shaheen said he hopes to share good news with Afghans soon. Shaheen said talks between the Taliban and US representatives are resuming today. He said the final points of a peace agreement with Washington are being finalized. The 9th round of peace talks to end the 18-year-long Afghan war started last week. Yemen's government forces have recaptured southern Aden province from separatist forces. Information Minister Muammar al-Eryani says government troops have also taken control of Aden airport. Earlier this week, the internationally recognized government also retook oil-rich Shabwa province. The escalation comes despite repeated calls for a ceasefire by the Saudi-led coalition. And Yemen's Houthi rebels have destroyed tons of food aid held up for months in the war-torn country. UN says the aid was intended for families in the city of Taiz in November 2018. For details, watch this report.
Yemen was already the Arabian Peninsula's poorest country when a Saudi-led coalition intervened in 2015 to prop up the government. Conflict has triggered malnutrition, and the UN calls it the world's worst humanitarian crisis. The WFP says it feeds around 11 million people a month in Yemen. Food distribution to Houthi-controlled territories in June were stopped after food meant for Yemeni civilians was diverted. Food program spokesperson says they need unimpeded access to all areas of the country to provide food to those who need it most.
We warned the organizations, the international organizations, to take their responsibilities. Otherwise, we will deter those who might be tempted to do this again. Providing expired food to the Yemeni people, we will never allow this.
The UN says it was desperate for funds in Yemen when a shortage of cash forced it to temporarily stop its aid programs.
Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe have discussed the security situation in Middle East. They met in Tokyo during Zarif's two-day visit to Japan on his latest leg of his Asian tour. Japanese media reported Abe and Zarif discussed ways to reduce tensions between Iran and the US. In a statement, Zarif has said he and Abe held consultations on securing gains made under 2015 nuclear agreement. Lebanon has stressed its right to defend itself after 2 Israeli drones violated its airspace. President Michel Aoun denounced the act as a declaration of war. Lebanon's Higher Defense Council says the country has a right to defend itself against any aggression. Prime Minister Saad Hariri says the attack poses a threat to regional stability. He says Israel used the attack to change the rules of engagement. The violation of Lebanese airspace came after Israel launched strikes in neighboring Syria. Well, now I'll take a much-needed short break, but don't go anywhere. Welcome back. After the break, you're watching Indus News, and I'm Fiza Jamal with our latest stories in detail. Moving on, Brazil is ready to accept $22 million in aid from G7 countries to fight fires in the Amazon. Earlier, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro rejected French President Emmanuel Macron's offer of aid. Bolsonaro spokesperson Rijo Barros says aid will only be accepted if Brazil controls the way it is spent. Meanwhile, Peru and Colombia have called for an emergency meeting between Amazonian nations next month. In Mexico, 23 people have been killed in a fire at a bar in the coastal state of Veracruz. The Attorney General's office says 8 women are among the dead. It said 13 others were severely injured and are being treated at local hospitals. Local authorities say they are investigating if the fire was started deliberately. Now in Peru, archaeologists have unearthed the remains of 227 children. The sacrificial site was used by the pre-Columbian Chimu culture. The remains were unveiled after a year of digging in Juan Chaco, a beachside tourist town in Lima. Chief archaeologist Ferran Castillo says the children, aged between 4 and 14, were sacrificed to honor the Chimu god. Chimu culture thrived between 1200 and 1400 CE. Archaeologists first found children's remains at a site in the town's Pampa La Cruz neighborhood. 56 skeletons were unearthed in June 2018 alone. U.S. President Donald Trump has approved an emergency declaration for Puerto Rico ahead of Tropical Storm Durian. Storm Durian caused power blackouts, uprooted trees, and ripped off roofs in Barbados and St. Lucia. The storm is expected to become a hurricane after it moves across Puerto Rico later today. It's on track to hit the Bahamas and Florida. The U.S. Federal Management Agency says nearly 3,000 federal employees have been stationed to offer assistance. At least 5 migrants have died and 20 are missing after a shipwreck off the Libyan coast. The vessel was carrying up to 90 people. The Libyan Coast Guard says the bodies of 5 migrants were recovered. Over 65 people were rescued 9 miles off the coast of the city of Homs. 3 of the dead were from Morocco, 1 from Sudan and 1 from Somalia. The UNHCR says most survivors were from Sudan, with others from Egypt, Morocco and Tunisia. Libya has long been a major transit route for migrants, especially from sub-Saharan Africa. A Chinese-made jetliner completed its first test flight at Beijing Daxing International Airport earlier this week. This means heavyweights of the industry like Airbus and Boeing will have to compete with a new player in the industry. More in this report.
From cell phones to 5G infrastructure, China has made inroads into key global industries, and now China is trying to make its mark in the Boeing industry.
I feel very proud as a pilot flying a passenger jet manufactured independently by China and landing at the Daxing airport.
The Chinese-made passenger jet left the city of Chengdu, landing at Beijing's Daxing airport 2 hours later. After the landing, the ARJ-21 completed a series of test exercises.
We fly to Daxing airport as part of second stage flight tests of the newly built airport. We mainly undertake tests including simulated low visibility flight, desync drill, airport catering and sewage disposal, among others.
The ARJ-21 flies at an altitude of nearly 12,000 meters and can reach speeds of up to 827 kilometers an hour. The aircraft will later fly back to Chengdu as part of its next phase of testing.
Moscow's air show MAX 2019 has opened with a demonstration of Russian military jets and civil aircraft. For the opening day's display, watch this report.
States displayed their military strength to highlight where they stand internationally. A similar spectacle has crisscrossed the skies above Moscow. Over 800 businesses from around the world are taking part in the annual air show MAX 2019. Russia hopes the event will show up sales of Russian-made aircraft. Taking part in the show are 180 firms from 29 countries, including Germany, Britain, France, and the US.
I was surprised by the number and variety of models this year, starting with the models of the old time, such as the legendary Tu-144 aircraft, and ending with the latest ones, such as the Airbus A350. This is very incredible, and everyone likes it, including me.
This year's expo is the first organized with the participation of China. President Vladimir Putin visited the opening ceremony of the air show with his Turkish counterpart Tayyip Erdogan. The military might of countries and their regional alliances are being made visible for everyone to see.
Looking at all this strength, looking at all this power, even purely visually, they arouse fear, but at the same time, aesthetic pleasure. So I think it's great.
The Maxair show continues until September the 1st, 2019.
Now onto the world of business, where the European Union has launched an investigation into Google's job search tool. Google places a widget at the top of searches, circumventing the need to click through to job sites. EU Competition Commissioner Margrethe Vestager questioned whether it is fair for Google to have such control over its rivals. 23 job search sites urged Brussels to take action last month. Google's competitors fear the move is a ploy to gain market shares before monetizing its business model. And European stock markets are mostly lower over fears of impending recession in the US. Earlier, Asian stocks closed flat on lingering doubts about trade talks between the US and China. The Frankfurt DAX and the CAC index in Paris are also in negative territory. Many economists see the inverted yield curve as evidence that the US economy is headed into recession. In Asia, the Shanghai Composite and Hong Kong's Hang Seng closed down a fraction. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 index was slightly higher. The Kospi gained nearly 1% despite Japan's exclusion of South Korea from its preferential trade list today. Well, I had to puff on my makeup multiple times because it's very humid in Lahore, but let's see what the weather is looking like where you live. Well, these are all of our latest stories in detail I have for you this hour. Stay tuned to Indus News for further updates.